Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about Justice League. I finally caught up with this movie, and I gotta admit, going into it, I was really feeling trepidatious. All of the hate that this movie has gotten, the lack of making, that much bank and everything like that, making far less than what they were hoping for, all these kinds of things. I mean, I'd been hearing mixed reactions. People have out now loved it. I've heard people bashing it and hating on it. I've heard people right down the middle. There were aspects of it that were really good, but it underwhelmed me and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't know how I was going to react to it. I had high hopes that I would love it because I loved Man of Steel. I loved Suicide Squad, the extended cut. Batman v Superman, I did enjoy the theatrical, but once we got the extended cut of that, I loved that much more. Wonder Woman, I really, really enjoyed, and, that kind of thing. So, like, at least as far as I'm concerned, I've enjoyed pretty much all of these, DCEU films thus far, more so than I've had gripes. Suicide Squad's probably the one that I had the most gripes about, because of sort of the villain, the plot or lack thereof, and how it was really paint by numbers, and we've seen that before. I mean, go back to Ghostbusters 1984, which is the common thing people were saying and comparing it to and whatever like that. But still, I enjoyed the performances. I mean, even if you don't like the overall product, you can still see good in it. And I loved Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn and Will Smith as Deadshot and everything like that. And the rest of the cast, that's kind of what the most redeeming thing about that movie was for me. So as I say, my track record is I've enjoyed these movies much more than I've had complaints about them. As far as Man of Steel is concerned, I went to bat for this movie time and time and time again. I made videos responding to detractors and things like that. And similarly so, I seem to be repeating myself a little bit with The Last Jedi now, which is getting the same kind of reaction. It subverts expectations, and I thought it was a really profound story and really moving and emotional. In certain, estimations, it's not pitch perfect. There are things that I did have, issues with the film. But I've already made like 2 half-hour length videos a piece defending aspects of the movie that I've heard people either complaining about or not paying attention to or not really understanding, which is what I was doing with Man of Steel back in the day when it came out. And so, I mean, going into Justice League, I already liked the casting. I've been a big-time fan of the casting. I hadn't really seen much of, well, actually any of Ezra Miller's work or Ray Fisher, things like that. But the tried and true triumvirate, Ben Affleck's Batman, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, Henry Cavill's Superman, I have really liked and enjoyed what these actors have brought to these respective roles in their outings, And even in spite of that, like Jason Momoa, I had a vague familiarity with. He was in the Conan remake, and I had watched some of the Stargate he was a part of, such like that. But I didn't know him well and truly, But I was still massively excited that he was playing Aquaman, Arthur Curry, one of my favorite all-time DC Comics characters, and I've always been much more of a DC Comics fan than Marvel. Of course, that's not to, bear any discrepancies toward Marvel, because I grew up with them as well. X-Men and Spider-Man and, not so much the Avengers, but as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has come about, I've warmed to a lot of them, and I've really enjoyed a lot of them. And the thing that I'm not going to be doing in this video is making comparisons along those lines, because I feel like it's a wasted discussion, it's a waste of time, and I'm not going to throw any fuel to the fire of fanboy rage on either side of the aisle. I like both Marvel and DC properties. I've always just sort of, leaned a little bit more toward the DC stuff. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, all that kind of stuff. Flash, Aquaman, etc. Green Lantern. And so yeah, man, going into this flick, I was immediately sort of taken aback by the opening song. I love that song, the Leonard Cohen original. I was a little bit taken aback by the vocalist. I don't know who was singing it. Everybody knows, and I was just kind of like, you know, which followed. I believe, we saw sort of like a mobile video, something that's supposed to look like a kid's mobile video of Superman, I guess before he was killed or something like that. And immediately you see the CGI upper lip of Henry Cavill. And this was the first and longest lasting gripe I have about the movie. It's like one of the only things I have that's a gripe about the movie that I didn't enjoy were bits and pieces, bits and bobs strewn all throughout, from beginning to end, of what I can only estimate as being poor CGI. Not so much in the characters, like Cyborg. I'm assuming he was fully CGI. Didn't mind that. Steppenwolf, for the most part, he kind of looked like a video game villain to a point at certain points. But for the most part, I didn't mind it. The upper lip thing did, beacon out to me every time it showed up. And did kind of bug me every time I saw it, every time I noticed it. But mostly the CG that was the most, sort of observable and annoying to me were more so the backdrops. In the early going in the movie, there's like a close-up of Diana, and you can tell the backdrop behind her. It's green screened. It's, kind of something harkening back to the Star Wars prequels where it was all green screens, and you could there was no depth. There was no, visual depth. There was no feeling like the characters in the foreground and there's background behind them. It was very noticeable. It kind of took me out every time I would notice it, and it happened with her. It happened with, Aquaman, Arthur Curry, when Bruce Wayne goes and talks to him. And it's usually in the close-ups. It's usually when they're closed up on, the actor, the respective actor in the given scene. And just, there's like a haze behind them, and it doesn't match the rest of the shots, the establishing shots or the surrounding shots or whatever like that. And that, it was happening on and off all throughout the movie. And then you get to the third act where, if you've paid attention to the trailers, it was very noticeably different. It was like the whole battle that's supposed to happen toward the end of the film was originally like nighttime. And then after Zack Snyder had to step away from the project, and I think they brought Joss Whedon in, suddenly the trailers were showing those nightscapes, if you will, those sequences that were supposed to be in shadow and at night and whatever like that. It was all red, fiery skies behind them and everything, the heroes, respectively. And that whole segment of the film, there was a give and take where it was passable and I didn't mind it and I didn't really notice it. And then there were certain sequences where it just struck out at me. So like that, that was the overbearing thing. My only gripe was those segments where I just noticed the CGI. There's even one shot with Steppenwolf himself where most of the time it's palatable and I don't really mind it. I never felt like, okay, that's a CG character who's not there. But there was one shot where it's like an action shot and they pull away really rapidly from him and it blatantly looked horrible for just a few seconds. But I did notice that. And so that's kind of, I just want to get that out of the way right away, all of my gripes, because that's pretty much the limitations of my issues with the film were the poor CGI sequences. There weren't an overabundance of them, but every time there was one, whether it's Cavill's upper lip, whether it's the backdrop, whatever like that, every time it was noticeable, I just kind of like grimaced and was like, because it took me out a little bit. Everything else about the piece, I felt it was mostly fluid. I didn't feel the flip-flop, give and sway that I've heard described from people saying, oh, you can definitely notice where Snyder's bits are and where Joss Whedon's are. I'm not, I don't want to say I'm adept enough to really, being familiar with either of their works. the films that they have directed and such like that, to really call those things out. I didn't really notice any, huge discrepancies there, given sway, as I say. Most of the movie was just enjoyable. It just seemed to flow naturally for the most part, at least for me. And I think a lot of that has to do with, as I was equating with Suicide Squad, the performances, the actors playing these roles. Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Henry Cavill, Jason Momoa, Ezra Miller, who was fantastic from his introduction in the movie, where he's going and visiting his father, played by Billy Crudup, in prison. There was a real heart to that, to that discussion they were having. He wants to try to clear his father's name, and for the death of his mother and whatever like that, and it just, the performances in those moments spoke to me, reached out to me. I found it relatable, and I could empathize with them and sympathize with them, and I was drawn in. And then, of course, as the Flash, Barry Allen, becomes more involved in the piece, Ezra Miller is hilariously likable. He's the one guy without any friends, but he's the most likable guy out of everybody. All the quips he says, and he's trying to like fist pump Victor, Cyborg, later on when they're digging up soups. And it's just, he's absolutely likable. He's hilarious. I loved him. Speaking of Vic, Cyborg, I've been a longtime fan of him, going back to the Teen Titans animated series, not Teen Titans Go. I want to differentiate the Teen Titans animated series. And that got me into some of the Teen Titans comics, and carrying over when the New 52 began and Cyborg officially had moved up, to the Justice League and everything like that. I just got to give props, massive props for Ray Fisher, because I loved the depth. Again, here's a character who debuts in the film. We're first told, oh, well, he's deceased by Alfred. He's giving that information to Bruce. And, of course, if you've watched any of the previous films, that's not the case. He's in there. He's coming. And just the whole life that, as portrayed by Ray Fisher, that Vic has had to live. He's kind of in hiding. His father's telling him he can have a life, he can go out, he can venture out, but he's very much conflicted because of all the cybernetic technology, this alien technology. It's constantly upgrading every day with almost a mind of its own, and he never knows from hour to hour, from minute to minute, what the next thing is going to be. How can I go out? How can I, I can't even control this. I don't even understand this. I haven't wrapped my mind around it. Everyone thinks I'm dead. Have you told anybody at the office? And I love that moment where he's like, oh, you're afraid of showing him the monster. And he's like, you're not a monster. And Vix just turns around and goes, it's funny that you would associate me being the monster in that equation. Which was like, snap. Oh, snap, as Flash says later. So I immediately loved their performances. Now, with Aquaman, here's a character I love. I love Aquaman, especially the New 52 Jeff Johns run when the New 52 began. Making Aquaman, the badass, bringing him up to that level that he always was in my mind, but to the minds of many others in that initial run in the New 52. I was a little concerned because a lot of what I was hearing building up to the film and some of the, backlash commentary coming out of it was, oh, he's like a surfer dude. What's up with him? He's not really serious and all this kind of stuff. And so I was a little apprehensive. I didn't want an overabundance of Aquaman being a punchline, or constantly riffing and like you see in the trailers, my man, and all that kind of stuff. And like, I love that he is thoroughly a badass. Like 3/4 through the movie, he's very stoic. He's kind of reserved. You can sense the power that emanates out of him. You have that sort of brief little interactivity with him and Mira and everything like that. I love that. I love seeing Amber Heard as Mira. I can't wait to see more of her in the Aquaman movie, and both of them, the interpersonal interconnectivity that's going to be going on there. But you know, for the most part, it's power that is exuding off of Momoa. And I'm like, good. This is more what I want. You know, this isn't what I was afraid of. This isn't what I was fearing. That comes later, but there's a reasoning I feel for it. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when they're getting ready. They're getting battle ready to go face Steppenwolf. And they're all in the transport that Bruce has, you know, constructed. And you have Aquaman sitting on, I think it's the Batmobile, like the hood of the Batmobile. He doesn't realize he's sitting on the lasso of truth. And so he starts pouring his heart out. He's like looking at everybody. He's telling what he thinks, his 2 cents on everybody. He gets to Diana and he's like, whew, baby, you know. And then he just starts pouring his heart out about his fears and his hopes and his life. And I laughed audibly out loud before the reveal comes because I knew what it was. And it just, when you see the payoff, you know, Bruce is getting uncomfortable. He's like, maybe you want to check under yourself there, boy. And of course, Momoa gets up, Aquaman gets up, and there is the lasso. I laughed my ass off. As I say, I audibly started laughing like a full minute before they revealed it because I knew what it was. Then the payoff made me laugh that much harder. And so with this sudden like revelation spewing forth uncontrollably out of his mouth, it kind of levels the playing field for him, I think. I think he, like, you know, at this point, I've already said everything that I would never have said if I had my wits about me. I already revealed all my fears and everything to all these people. I guess I'm going to work with them. I guess I'm going to make the best out of this scenario. If I'm going to die, I'm going to go out swinging, you know, that kind of thing. And so he lets loose. He loosens up in the presence of them. And so you get the, my man, you get the, oh yeah, you know, all that kind of stuff that follows on. Because now that stoicism, that strength, I mean, it's still there, but he's less guarded. He knows he can let his hair down around the other Justice League members. And so he earned that. It was something he earned, in a sense, in a sort of twisted sense, because, you know, he probably wouldn't have wanted that to be the way it was, having sat on that lasso and whatever, and spilled all. You know, he would have probably stayed stoic and reserved, and maybe not as approachable to the other characters. But I like that was the turning point for him. That made him loosen up. He'd already done so out of his own hands, you know, out of his own control. And so, hell, F it. I'll roll with it. You know, roll with the punches. What's the worst that could happen? What, they gonna judge me? They gonna fire me? So I loved it. I love that aspect of it. And all around, I mean, that's really the thing. I just thoroughly enjoyed the movie at the end of the day. Barring those moments where I was taken out of it and I noticed the CGI, I loved, you know, it's kind of like, I said I wasn't going to make any comparisons along these lines, but it's kind of like the Avengers effect. For me, I watched Man of Steel. I love Cavill's Superman. I watched Batman v Superman. I love Ben Affleck's Batman. And I love the way, you know, they had that bounding off of each other rapport in that movie when finally they do, you know, go head to head. I love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, where we saw her first in Batman v Superman, then her own movie, Wonder Woman. And I like very much these performers, you know, their performances. Very similarly so, I was brought on board immediately with Ezra Miller as Barry Allen the Flash. I was brought on board immediately with Ray Fisher's Victor Stone, Cyborg, and Jason Momoa. You know, we caught a brief glimpse of him in Batman v Superman. But I was immediately drawn in to all of these performers, to all of these characterizations. And that's what it's, you know, it's like what, again, people have said about the Avengers. Oh, well, Marvel did it this way where they all had their solo movies and it built up. Well, I know these characters. You know, some people would take me to task and say, well, no, you don't, because that's, you know, the thing is, there are so many different versions of all these characters. Everybody knows a version of these characters, and none of them is the right one. It might be the right one for you, the individual, but none of them are the right one. None of them are the overarching, overall, that's the way they always were and always will be kind of thing, you know. Some people would say, well, Johnny, you're talking about Justice League, and you know, these aren't the real characters. This isn't the way I know the characters. Well, I could probably list for you 6 different versions of the characters from the comics alone. So it all depends on your own personal perspective, whether this movie matches what your estimation of those characters are, you know, internally in your head canon and everything like that. For me, I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all versions of the characters. This is just one iteration of all of them. Cumulative in that it did build out of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and you know, Wonder Woman and things like that. We saw the groundwork laid, and some people, I guess, aren't really even wrapping their minds around that because, oh, it's not the version I want. It's not the version I like. It's not. And again, everyone has their own different versions, so what version is it that you wanted? You know, that version is probably going to be the thing, you know, least wanted by dozens of other people, millions of other people, you know. There's so many different versions. For my part, watching this movie was thoroughly enjoyable, with the exception of those CGI moments that took me out and that were overly noticeable. The performances from all of the characters, Jeremy Irons, Alfred, you know, Joe Morton as Victor's father, Silas Stone, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, Diane Lane as Martha Kent. I was sorely missing seeing Perry White, you know, Lawrence Fishburne, had to think of it. But, you know, J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon and all this kind of stuff. I mean, Amber Heard as Mara. You know, I really enjoyed everybody. I don't think I had a problem with anybody in the movie, and that's what strung me along. That's what kept me attuned and enjoying it. Calling back on Paradise Island, seeing Hippolyta, Connie Nielsen, and the Amazons, and the whole aspect, calling back on the flashback as Diana is, you know, regaling Bruce with the history of Steppenwolf, and seeing how the armies of the Amazons and the armies of the Atlanteans and the armies of man, you know, all came together to try to quell him and all this kind of stuff. You saw some, you know, Green Lanterns in that fight as well, which was like, oh yeah, you know. And just, I was stoked. I was stoked. It gave me enough of all of the things I went into the movie hoping I would get. And it delivered on a lot of that stuff. You know, viscerally, emotionally, just wanting to see these titans, these characters on screen. It was just phenomenal to me. In a similar fashion to how I have reacted to Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman. You know, DC has been treating these characters like the modern comic book mythology, the modern mythology, on par with, I've made this allusion before in other discussions, but on par with like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Hercules, you know, all of these ancient mythologies. These superheroes, these characters are our modern equivalent. And the way Warner's has been depicting them in these Zack Snyder, you know, sort of directed pieces, and I forget the name of the lady director who did Wonder Woman off the top of my head, but the aesthetic is there, where it's these are titans, they're monumentous, they are giants, and they come together, they come head to head, they butt heads, and they fend off the villains, they fend off the evil, you know, whatever like that. And it's a hard path, and it's a path laden with frustrations and concerns and conflicts. Nobody is a perfect out-and-out hero. Superman himself, you know, one of the most disparaging things people have said is, oh, he's emo Superman and everything like that. But I like the epic humanist realism in the characterization. It's not all going to be perfect. If you are born as a child on this world and you have these amazing powers and you know, you could endanger the lives of the people you want to connect with, whether that be through your own fault, your own not being able to control those powers, or threats outwardly who want to try to control you and go against you and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's not easy peasy. It's not an easy road to travel. And these movies have given us that perspective. These characters, they are tremendous. They are titans among us mere mortals. And it's not going to just be easy for them to live their normal lives, to try to claim a life for their own. And that's very much what Man of Steel gave us. A Superman in conflict. A Superman who had to find his place in the world. Wrap his mind around what he was, who he was. And earn his place in the world by sacrificing himself, ironically enough. And similarly, the conflict between he and Bruce Wayne, Batman, as set upon each other by the manipulative Lex Luthor in Batman v Superman, and the doomsday creature that was born out of that. You know, these are modern mythic in scope tales, and that's how these movies have been directed, and this is how these stories have been weaved and are being told. And it just invigorates me. I love it. I love it. And I, more so than even the gripes that I had about Justice League, I loved it. Yes, I do have some thorough issues with it, and I will be highly, highly curious as to whether or not they're going to ever release the Zack Snyder, air quotes, cut, which is supposed to be longer, and there's scenes that were cut out. Superman in his black rejuvenation suit and all this kind of stuff. I haven't read too much into that stuff because, you know, I didn't want to be too spoiled on what might not be in the movie, maybe get hints of what was in the movie because I hadn't seen it yet. Now that I've seen it, I want to look into what was supposedly cut, what was edited out. And I'll be curious to see if they ever decide to release a Snyder cut, you know, that kind of thing. But if they never do, barring if they would go back in and tweak some of that CGI, some of those CGI elements from the upper lip of the Supes himself, the Man of Steel himself, to the backdrops of certain sequences, if they could make like a Japanese anime, which after it airs, they tweak it, they perfect it, and then they release that for the Blu-ray and whatever like that. I would love for them to do that. And then what we got theatrically, I would be very appeased with. I would be very satisfied with. And what it comes down to at the end of the day is this is just one man's perspective. My own, the blues man, Johnny Blues. And you can feel free to agree with me. You can feel free to disagree with me. You can call me crazy. You can call me every name under the sun. I don't care. You're not going to take away my enjoyment. You're not going to steal away the emotions and the satisfaction I got out of it. No matter what you say. No matter what you do. And, but of course, I'd love to hear from you one way or the other. Love it or hate it. If you didn't happen to enjoy it, tell me why. If you loved it to pieces, let me know that as well in the comments below. It's all about having a great conversation. The topic of talk, talking about interesting, great, fantastic, and sometimes suck-ass movies. But this one wasn't suck-ass to me, in any case. And so, yeah. Otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. This video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.